Subcommittee on Homeland Security will come to order. I'm pleased to be joined by the subcommittee's distinguished ranking member, a gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Underwood. Welcome, Admiral Lunday. Thank you for being here. While we await the details of the full fiscal year 2026 budget request, the focus of this hearing will be on the Coast Guard's priorities, a deeper dive into the current state of its acquisition programs, and the Coast Guard's strategies to expand its presence in the Arctic and counter China in the Indo-Pacific. We will begin with the ranking member's opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Admiral Lunday. Thank you for joining us today. As I said repeatedly over the last 2 weeks, it's challenging to have budget hearings without a budget request from this administration. It puts us in a difficult position, and Admiral Lunday, it puts you in a difficult position as well. So let me start by saying that my frustration and the frustration from my side of the aisle is not with you, Admiral, nor is it with the brave men and women of the Coast Guard who serve every day as armed forces, first responders, law enforcement officers, healthcare providers, intelligence officers, environmental engineers, navigation equipment maintainers, cybersecurity specialists, and so much more. The Coast Guard does it all, and we are so thankful that they do. We see that every day in Illinois, where nearly 200 coasties promote trade and protect waterway safety in Lake Michigan and the Illinois River watershed. And we see it in your creative approach to problem solving, like the Coast Guard's groundbreaking 2022 decision to begin training medical providers, which as a nurse is something that I'm excited to continue to support and help expand. Congress and this subcommittee are here to be your partners in these efforts. Our job is to ensure that the Coast Guard has the resources it needs to do all 11 of its statutory missions, including saving lives, stopping drug flow, and keeping our waterways open to commerce. But we cannot be good partners without good information, and we are not getting good information from this administration's Department of Homeland Security. At a time when the Coast Guard is in the middle of a massive fleet recapitalization and you are staring down some very big acquisition decisions, that information flow is more important than ever. Unfortunately, there are several areas where the Coast Guard is falling short. The Coast Guard was the last of the DHS components to provide Congress with its legally required spending plan for fiscal year 25, missing the deadline by 9 days. When it showed up, it included plans for a new $50 million corporate jet for the department that had never been requested or even mentioned before. The administration has failed to send up a fiscal year 26 budget, and we are hearing rumors that it may not do so until next month. The Coast Guard's rumored Force Design 2028 plan has yet to see the light of day, and we did not receive your testimony until 8 p.m. last night. That's an information flow problem, and it's not sustainable. Consistent, detailed communication is critical to achieving our shared goals this Congress, and that's what we need from the Coast Guard moving forward. Lastly, while we discuss your work to combat external threats, we cannot overlook threats within the Coast Guard itself. Operation Fouled Anchor exposed serious failures in addressing misconduct, and we have a responsibility to ensure that survivors receive the support that they deserve. Perpetrators are held accountable, and the culture within the Coast Guard reflects the highest standards of integrity and professionalism. I very much appreciate your commitment in our meeting yesterday to providing a full briefing on the current status of this issue and the steps the Coast Guard has taken to improve its sexual assault prevention work and support survivors. Thank you again, Admiral, for your service, and I look forward to working closely with you and my colleagues to ensure the Coast Guard has the resources it needs to succeed. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Madam Ranking Member. As part of my respect for your time and the fact that I was late, and since I still haven't gotten a request for anybody on this committee for me to do an opening statement on anybody's budget, I am going to yield back my opening statement time. And I also want to thank you for our fellow on this committee who hooked me up with my phone cover, which, by the way, if there's anybody else on the committee that has one of these for their phone cover, please go on the record now. Okay, we'll move right along. Admiral, you're recognized for your opening statement.
Good afternoon, Chairman Day, Ranking Member Underwood, distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify here today. Chairman, I ask that my written testimony be entered into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you for your enduring support of the Coast Guard and of our servicemen and women and their families. Our people who volunteer to serve, who operate in a dangerous and unforgiving maritime environment to protect the American people, are extraordinary. They make the U.S. Coast Guard the best in the world. Today's a pivotal moment for our service, a time of both profound change and challenge and unprecedented opportunity. Our nation faces increasingly complex and dangerous threats to the security and prosperity of Americans, and the American people need a strong and capable Coast Guard now more than ever. Under the leadership of President Trump and Secretary Noem, the Coast Guard is making America more secure. On January 21st, I directed our operational commanders to immediately increase Coast Guard presence and operations along the U.S. border and maritime approaches, starting with the southern border, where the President had declared a national emergency just the day before. We surged forces, tripling the number of forward-deployed aircraft, ships, boats, and teams to control, secure, and defend the southern border. The Coast Guard also increased efforts to secure and defend our ports and waterways, which are vital to U.S. economic prosperity and strategic mobility. And we did that both in the physical domain and in cyberspace. And the Coast Guard continues other operations to secure our northern border and the border and approaches around Alaska, Hawaii, our 3 U.S. territories in the Pacific, and our 2 U.S. territories in the Caribbean. Our highest priority is achieving full operational control of the border, and that includes our ports and waterways. As the Coast Guard has done throughout our history, we adjusted our operational posture to focus on the top needs and priorities while continuing to conduct our other missions with excellence. Every day, our Coast Guard men and women, with our ships, aircraft, boats, and technology, are delivering results for the American people. We are deterring and interdicting illegal migration by sea. In the last 4 months alone, we've prevented over 860 aliens from illegally reaching the U.S. by sea and deterred thousands more. We continue to combat foreign terrorist organizations, including cartels and transnational criminal organizations, by interdicting smugglers and seizing bulk cocaine and other drugs at sea. We've already surpassed our entire fiscal year 2024 cocaine interdiction numbers, and we've seized so far this year 133 metric tons of cocaine and marijuana, principally cocaine. And I have set as a top operational priority combating illicit fentanyl shipments in commercial maritime shipping. However, despite the mission's success and great work of our people, the Coast Guard is in a severe readiness crisis that has been decades in the making. Today, our Coast Guard is less ready than at any other time since the end of World War II 80 years ago. This is not sustainable, and now is the time for fundamental change. And we need your support now more than ever. With President Trump's direction to rebuild the military and secure our borders, and Secretary Noem, under her leadership, the Coast Guard will implement Force Design 2028, a bold blueprint to renew our service. As Secretary Noem testified here last week, with Force Design 2028, we will transform the Coast Guard into a more agile, capable, and responsive force. Together, we must act now through this blueprint, along with increased capital investments in reconciliation and in a sustained top-line growth in our annual appropriation to restore Coast Guard readiness today and prepare us for the future. As we navigate through this time of transformation, I have certain hope for the future of our Coast Guard. No matter the challenges ahead, if there's one thing our distinguished service history in both peace and in war tell us, it's this: with a ready Coast Guard crew and the strong support of the American people, there is nothing we can't accomplish. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Admiral. I'm going to defer my questions until later in the hearing. So the chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Illinois for her questions. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Admiral, thank you for being here today. We know the Coast Guard does an incredible job with what you have, but also remains chronically under-resourced. The Coast Guard does life-saving work to respond to maritime disasters, combat the flow of illegal drugs, counter China, and prevent cyber attacks. I strongly support large increases to your budget, probably even larger than you've requested in some areas. But I'm concerned that this administration's political goals are shifting those limited resources away from strategic theaters where bad actors are aggressively testing American resolve. In your written testimony, you stated that the Coast Guard is, quote, surging operational forces to the U.S.-Mexico border and the Gulf of Mexico. So my question for you is, where specifically are those forces and resources to support them coming from? What theaters and missions were they assigned to before this surge? How many deportation flights has the Coast Guard flown, and why is that the best use of the aviation assets?
Ranking Member Underwood, thanks for your questions and your support. First, to answer your question about the alien expulsion operation flights, to date, since 20 January, the Coast Guard has flown 157 of those flights in support of other Department of Homeland Security components for southern border security operations. As to the other operations where we have surged assets to the southern border, and for us, the southern border also includes the border approaching Florida and our territories in the Caribbean. Mm-hmm. That's part of the southern border for us as well. And so we took planned operations from some other areas and in consultation, principally supporting combatant commanders. I consulted with those combatant commanders and the Department of Defense and briefed the Secretary on my plans to temporarily change some of those planned deployments. Now, this type of decision is not unprecedented, and we make those tough trade-offs all the time because there's an increasing demand for Coast Guard resources and always a limited number of cutters, boats, aircraft, and crews to provide them. And so that's part of the risk decision that I make in consultation with our area commanders.
Have any personnel, vessels, air assets, or other resources been pulled from the Coast Guard's Arctic strategy to accommodate the southern border surge?
No, Ranking Member Underwood, they have not.
What about your Indo-Pacific mission? Did you reduce lift capacity in the region in favor of more deportation flights here? And are we going to be slower in building our presence there as a result of the surge?
Ranking Member Underwood, there were 2 operational deployments that I directed to be changed through that process I described before. And I want to be specific about that. One was a planned patrol working for Indo-Pacific Command, one of our national security cutters, and I consulted with Admiral Paparo about that before making that change. But there's been no change in our permanent presence in the Indo-Pacific. The other change in the Atlantic, you asked about the Arctic. We had the Cutter Calhoun, another national security cutter that was scheduled to support a port visit for a senior leader meeting of the Arctic Coast Guard Forum in Iceland, and we canceled that planned meeting. It wasn't an operational meeting, and so that was related to the Arctic, but I wanted to be specific and clear in my answer.
And what about the Great Lakes, where the Coast Guard plays a critical role in commerce and safety for the community I represent? Has there been any change to the staffing plans for the Great Lakes region?
There have not been changes to that staffing plan. Our presence in the Great Lakes remain as important as always, which includes our domestic icebreaking presence there.
Excellent. In your testimony, you also wrote that you are tripling the number of forward deployed air and surface assets at the southern border and simultaneously seeking total operational control of the region. It's clear strategic trade-offs are being made, and I'm concerned about the impact on your other missions. The Coast Guard desperately needs more funding to meet its mission, and the passage of a reconciliation bill is far from guaranteed at this time. And Coasties, like most Americans, are struggling with the rising cost of living. I speak frequently with young guardsmen and women who struggle to afford housing and access medical care, which is why I was horrified last Friday when we received a last-minute addition to your spend plan for fiscal 25, a new $50 million Gulfstream 5 for Secretary Noem's personal travel coming from the Coast Guard budget. She already has a Gulfstream 5, by the way. This is a new one. And so, Admiral, I have just one question for you here. Have you received any outreach, requests, or any other communication from anyone above you at DHS or any political appointee in the Trump administration regarding a new plane for the Secretary?
Ranking Member Underwood, so first of all, thank you for the support of the committee and the continuing resolution for 25. And as part of that spend plan to address the needs of our service members and their families, we're able to provide that cover the pay raise for military and civilian personnel, including a targeted pay raise for our junior enlisted personnel, which was essential. You had asked about the military command and control aircraft. So first of all, meeting the needs of our Coast Guard men and women that are doing frontline operations is my top operational priority, and it's a top operational priority of the Secretary. She's been clear with that to me, and I know she testified to that effect before the subcommittee last week. The Coast Guard, like the other military services, operates 2 military long-range command and control aircraft. This is part of our military operational fleet of aircraft. These are C-37 variants. The older one is a C-37 Alpha variant. And like a lot of the rest of our operational aviation fleet and our cutters and our boats and our shore facilities, it's old and it's approaching obsolescence and the end of its service life. The avionics are increasingly obsolete. The communications are increasingly unreliable, and it's in need of recapitalization like much of the rest of the fleet. But this aircraft is necessary to provide the Secretary, the Deputy Secretary, me as the Acting Commandant, the Acting Vice, and our 2 area commanders with secure, reliable, on-demand communications and movement to go forward, visit our operating forces conducting the missions, and then come back here to Washington and make sure we can work together to get them what they need.
Mr. Chairman, my time's expired. I just want to note that I didn't hear the Admiral answer the question about whether he was directed to purchase this new Gulfstream 5, and I just want to note that as I conclude my time. Thank you. I yield back.
The chair recognizes Mr. Rutherford for 5 minutes for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member. And Admiral, thank you for being here today. I want to talk about a little bit about the future of the Coast Guard's aviation. Because as your responsibility grows to support not only maritime security, but defense missions continue to increase and become ever more critical to our national security. I'm concerned about the mission readiness of our fixed-wing and rotary-wing aviation fleets. It seems like there's been, prior to you, somewhat of a disjointed response to the aviation planning, and that a comprehensive strategy would help ensure that there are no gaps in readiness. And one of the things that we actually included in the FY23 Coast Guard reauthorization bill was a request for a study like that. So three quick questions on the aviation issue, Admiral. Does the Coast Guard have the aviation assets required to fill its operational missions today? Number two, when should we or can we expect the aviation strategy called for in the 23 Coast Guard reauthorization? And then finally, while I understand the move to a single platform because of the commonality of training and maintenance and all of that, one of the things that I worry about is if all of these assets are being kind of handed down, a lot of them, I understand, are reaching end of life. And so that could create some gaps in the not too distant future. Could you talk about your openness to a mixed fleet if that were necessary to put that off? And I'd like you to tell me how we can help you achieve whatever your new plan turns out to be.
Thank you for the questions, Congressman, about the aviation fleet mix and where we're going. And so we had an opportunity to come up and brief the committee staff on an initial readout of our aviation strategy going forward, following on for the requirement in the Authorization Act. But we have more work to do. And part of that is an ongoing analysis of alternatives of what that fleet mix should be across our rotary wing, our helicopters, and also our fixed wing fleet. And so that will also include, I see, an increase in our long-range uncrewed or unmanned aerial systems. That's work we've been doing for years in a joint program office approach with Customs and Border Protection, and I see that as a key component going forward. But that will be borne out in on the analysis of alternatives as we work to refine that aviation strategy. So part of our challenge is that we have been operating airframes, particularly the helicopters, to the end of their service life. In some cases, like for our 860 that's built by Sikorsky, well beyond what anyone else in the world operates, which is why we found ourselves in a difficult position late last year, where for those hulls that we had operated beyond 19,000 hours, Sikorsky communicated concerns that they did not have data to support that operation beyond that point. And so we had to ground those aircraft with high time hours until we can go through and replace the key components that take them over that limit. And that's just a symptom that even though we can operate aircraft to that level, we should not be. We should be investing in new aircraft and recapitalizing those, and then have an appropriate mix to meet not only the demands of today, but the demands of the future. Part of the Force Design 2028 effort that Secretary Nome has directed and discussed will be to look at what the Coast Guard's operating concepts are in the future, and also what our force structure and force design is, including our aviation mix, and how that fits within the broader mix of assets across our ships, boats, aircraft, and shore facilities. And we look forward to working with the committee on those needs and the level of investment required to modernize the future fleet and get to that point.
Thank you, Admiral. And I've got just 30 seconds left. But you kind of segued into my next question, which deals with the unmanned systems. And one of the things that I'd like is can you talk about the resources you need to get that long endurance aerial unmanned program off the ground for something like an MQ-9 or some other system, and the importance that plays in offsetting your needs in the current aviation fleet?
Congressman, I look forward to working with you and the members of the subcommittee to provide greater detail on that information as we move forward on budget reconciliation, and we look forward to the release of the President's budget request for FY26. But we've already done very strong work with CBP on the importance and the value of the long-range UAS. The MQ-9 is what we operate with CBP.
Thank you. I see my time's expired. I yield back. Thank you.
Ms. Hinson, the floor is yours for 5 minutes for questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Admiral. Again, thank you for coming to testify before our subcommittee. The Coast Guard plays such an important role, as you've already touched on a number of topics, from interdiction and defense, just such a necessary line of helping to keep our country safe. And under President Trump's leadership, obviously, we are seeing a renewed investment and a renewed commitment to that promise to keep America safe. I hear you talk about investment in a modernized fleet, expanded maritime enforcement capabilities. All those things, I think, make Iowans feel good. Even though we're between two rivers, we like to know that our coasts are safe, but also, obviously, Iowa has a very significant Coast Guard presence with a fleet that needs upgrading. So that's going to be my line of questioning today, because we are, Iowa in Dubuque is home to the home port for the cutter Wyaconda, which is 60 years old. So a nice old ship celebrating its 60th anniversary at the end of this month. Absolutely vital in keeping the upper Mississippi navigable for us, but it comes down to supporting our farmers, our producers, being able to get things to market up and down the Mississippi River safely and efficiently. So these legacy cutters have served our country well, but they're showing their age, and so we must, I believe, move quickly to replace them with more modern vessels that can keep up with today's demands. So we know that Coast Guard has initial approval for this program, so do you agree that it is time to prioritize building these new cutters to make sure we can deploy them and get them into service without delay?
Representative Hinson, it certainly is important. Most people think of the Coast Guard certainly along the coast or at sea, but we're just as present in America's heartland, in our Great Lakes and in the inland rivers and waterways, including in your district. So we have a recapitalization program for those construction tenders and those river tenders that are so vital to keeping life-saving commerce going throughout the United States into markets overseas. So the Waterways Commerce Cutter was just approved by the Department of Homeland Security to enter initial production for the first 8. That's being built by Birdon, is the shipbuilder down in Bayou La Batterie, Alabama. And so those cutters, state-of-the-art, will replace the aging but still very viable cutters like Wyaconda that operates in a home port out of Dubuque, and provide the critical services necessary to keep commerce moving, which is vital to our economic prosperity.
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad we share that priority. Do you have any insight into potential home ports for those cutters once they come off of the line and they're done being built in Louisiana?
Congresswoman, I don't have a home port decision on all of the Waterways Commerce Cutters that will be built. Some of them, or they will be larger than many of the existing ones, and so we'll have to assess what the infrastructure needs are as we go forward, but we look forward to working with members of the committee as we make those decisions, along with the administration.
Thank you for that. My last question today, I heard you talk about how important interdiction is. You mentioned Florida and the Caribbean being the other element of the southern border. We think about the Rio Grande and the states, but really it's about what's happening at sea in preventing those bad actors, particularly many of those who are backed by international criminal gangs or adversarial governments like the CCP from being able to exploit our U.S. ports and waterways. And we know PRC is one of the leading sources of counterfeit goods coming into our country, illegal transshipments, trying to get around our trade laws, deceptive shipping practices, right? They use that transnational shipment constantly to get around sanctions enforcement. So can you speak a little to the Coast Guard's role in enforcing and identifying and then interdicting those types of shipments in coordination maybe with other agencies under Homeland Security?
Representative Hinson, we work very closely with other parts of Homeland Security and the intelligence community to enforce the U.S. Requirements and restrictions on illegal or unauthorized shipments, particularly by those states that sponsor those shipments that we prevent from coming into the country. And we are concerned about the activities of the CCP, whether it's illegal movement of goods that are prohibited for entry, or whether it's presenting threats in cyberspace to our maritime critical infrastructure. And we've been busy, not only our operational commanders in Atlantic and Pacific area, but Coast Guard Cyber Command, working with the Department of Homeland Security and others to make sure that we can improve the cybersecurity of our port critical infrastructure so that others that may seek to hold it at risk will be unable to do so. And the American people can be sure that infrastructure is resilient and can withstand the threat of any attack or disruption.
Are you utilizing AI at all in that technology? You mentioned the cyberspace specifically, but are you using any of those technologies to help track or even anticipate potential attacks or need for interdiction?
We are using AI technology with others in the cyber operations space, with U.S. Cyber Command and CISA within the Department of Homeland Security. And I can follow up with more specifics about how we use that.
That'd be great. And if we need to go into SCIF to talk about that, happy to do that. Thank you very much, sir. I yield back.
Thank you. The ranking member of the full committee, Ms. DeLauro, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your questions.
Pleased to you, Mr. Chairman and ranking member, and to Admiral Lunday. Between today and tomorrow, there are 11 hearings. So just trying to do what I'm supposed to do as ranking member of the committee. So I want to thank Chairman Amodei and also the ranking member Underwood. And let me just say a thank you to you for your service. I look forward to getting your insights into several pressing issues. First, it will come as no surprise to you that I am a strong proponent of the MH-60 program. And the Coast Guard has utilized the MH-60 aircraft since the first one came into service in 1990. Throughout its over 30 years of service in the Coast Guard, it has undergone upgrades to components, engines, life support equipment, and most of all, avionics. The latest acquisition directorates have plans for the Coast Guard to use MH-60 aircraft well into the 2030s. Currently, no alternative helicopter or aircraft platform with the necessary capabilities to meet your mission objectives: search and rescue, routine patrol, and homeland security. First, let me ask you if you agree that the MH-60T, given its utility tactical transport, will be essential to the Coast Guard operations well into the future.
Ranking Member DeLauro, the H-60 will be essential. Regardless of the mix, it's the key component in our rotary wing fleet and the backbone of our aviation fleet. So whatever that mix ends up being, the 60 will be a mainstay, as it has been.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad to hear you say that. And as you continue to retire the MH-65, plans for procurement, and will it include the new hulls as well as the current recapitalization strategy?
Ranking Member DeLauro, I'm not able to discuss the specifics within the reconciliation or the President's budget request yet. Mm-hmm. But one of the things we've learned out of the challenge we had with the 19,000-hour limitation on our operation of the 60s is we need to be moving to purchase new hulls rather than beginning with hulls that have high time on them when we acquire them. Mm-hmm. That's the direction we need to be moving.
So we need to be watching what comes out in the budget.
Yes, Ranking Member DeLauro.
Okay, right, and we'll certainly then be back to you about that. Okay.
Thank you.
Let me follow up on an issue that I raised with the Commandant last year, the issue of sexual assault in the Coast Guard. I'm not going to recap the troubling history that predates this hearing, including years of unreported allegations of sexual assault at the Academy. Following the Accountability and Transportation Review in November of 23, the Commandant directed 33 initial actions to strengthen the climate and practices. On August 9, 2024, update noted that at the time, 18 of those directed actions had been completed. My questions are, as of today, how many of the directed actions have been completed?
Ranking Member DeLauro, as of today, 21 of those 33 directed actions have been completed. We're hard at work to complete the remaining ones and
What's
identify.
Your timeline on the remaining?
Ranking Member DeLauro, I can get back to you with a specific timeline on those remaining actions. The three that were most recently completed since that August letter that you described were improvements to security in the Chase Hall Cadet Barracks at the Academy, the start of our Sentinel resiliency training that includes bystander intervention training and additional sexual assault prevention and response training for those coming out of boot camp. And then I'll provide additional information for the record.
I would appreciate that. And I think maybe you can just assert, but we have your commitment to provide this committee with the regular updates as additional actions are completed. I think that would be helpful to us to know what's going on and how we are trying to meet the needs of the Coast Guard, of the Coasties who are there. So
I will, Ranking Member DeLauro, because combating and eliminating sexual assault and sexual harassment in the Coast Guard is a top priority. These are not only serious crimes, but they're a cancer at readiness, and they cause grievous harm to people. And so it's important that we continue this as a top priority to eliminate sexual
great.
assault and sexual harassment.
I'm pleased to hear that. It's been, I've been around here long enough to be at these hearings to know that this has been a consistent problem. I do want to say that I thought the Commandant was working diligently at doing that, but now asking you if you will continue to follow that up. It's also my understanding that the Department of Homeland Security of the Inspector General may be conducting additional oversight on this matter.
Ranking Member
Is that
DeLauro,
accurate?
the Coast Guard continues to fully cooperate
Great.
with the investigation by the DHS Inspector General.
Okay, that's what, I'm again making that assumption in your commitment to cooperating in that effort. And what my hope is that this can be a start of a dialogue between you and I. I very much, as I said, respected and appreciated the Commandant's response, and we had an ongoing conversation about this effort, and I know of her commitment to wanting to address this issue and to do something about it because of the critical role that the Coast Guard plays and the critical role that women play in this effort, and want to realize their dreams or aspirations through the Coast Guard, and they ought to feel that they are safe at that issue. So I look forward to having that same kind of a dialogue on a regular basis with you as well. Let me deal with what I call quality of life issues. And I believe just as the service never wavers, our support of the U.S. Coast Guard and our armed forces must be resolute and unwavering, as all of you are. And that includes ensuring that we continue to focus on the quality of life issues for service members. Cost of living. The cost of living crisis in this country is crushing families, and the members of the Coast Guard, unfortunately, are not exempt from the soaring costs of groceries, childcare, housing, the list goes on. Those who have already made great sacrifices, we should be doing everything that we can to ensure that they can raise a family and to make ends meet. I have been encouraged to see that the Coast Guard senior leadership embraced the notion in the past several years. I am told that these efforts have been really helpful in recruitment and retention efforts. But more needs to get done, and Congress must make sure that you have the investments to follow through. What, in your view, remain some of the biggest quality of life concerns for members of the Coast Guard? And do I have your commitment to continue to prioritize quality of life concerns, especially those associated with the rising cost of living?
Ranking Member DeLauro, the cornerstone of the Coast Guard's readiness, or of unit readiness, starts with the readiness of every single Coast Guard man or woman and their families. On that cornerstone, we build the readiness of the whole service. And so issues that impact that readiness, the most pressing are access to available housing, access to child care or child development services, access to the basic pay that they need to be successful. And that's why the support from the committee and Congress to address the targeted pay increase for junior enlisted personnel was so important for the Coast Guard and the other armed services as well. And then access to quality health care, which can be a particular challenge for our Coast Guard families and personnel because we're often located in remote areas away from population centers. So we have to work harder to, either with organic capability or access through TRICARE, to make sure they have the best access to available medical care as well.
I thank you for that answer, and I thank the Chairman for letting me go over as I have here. But I think it's critical, and my prior question about feeling safe, there is a morale problem that is quality of life. People need to feel safe, and that we have to understand here that addressing the issues that ensure that the folks have the necessary health care, the access to that health care wherever they are, whatever remote outpost they might be, and that child care, housing, basic pay are critical in understanding it. That's the only way to repeat what you have said, that we're going to have the robust readiness that we need to be able to address any eventuality. I thank you for your service. I thank you for your answers. I look forward to really. Just this one last thing, I worked very, very hard to make sure that when we did shut the government down and the Coast Guard folks were not included, we got that turned around. for the Coast Guard, so that those families were not left out in the cold with regard to the wherewithal that they needed to be safe and secure with their families. So I thank you, and I yield back my time, and I thank you graciously, Mr. Chairman, for your time.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Gus, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral, I want to talk a little bit about the High North. I know you mentioned that in your testimony. You say on the page 3 of your testimony that the service's top surface acquisition priority remains the polar security cutters and expanding the ice-breaking fleet to meet the President's direction. And he said that we shall continue to invest in heavy polar ice breaking is vital to counter foreign malign influence and protect America's sovereign interest in the polar regions. I know that currently we are at a very strategic disadvantage when it comes to other nations. I think currently we have one heavy icebreaker, the Polar Star, which is approximately 50 years in service, and then we have the Healy, which is a polar-capable icebreaker. So 2 icebreakers compared to the 50-plus that Russia currently has. We know that the High North has become very strategic and will continue to be so. And I know that there is underway the process of building the first icebreaker, I think, in 50 years here domestically, and proud that the Coast Guard is moving in that direction. But want to just see if you can talk a little bit about the importance of sustained funding for the Polar Security Cutter program.
Congressman, the Polar Security Cutter program is our top acquisition priority. We're excited about fulfilling the President's intent about building a fleet of icebreakers for the nation because of the Coast Guard operates those icebreakers. They operate it to assure access to our polar regions, both the Arctic and Antarctica, and then also our domestic icebreaking fleet for the Great Lakes and inland waterways. The Polar Security Cutter is the first of the next generation of heavy icebreakers that we are building right now. And we're beginning to see substantial acceleration forward in momentum. The shipbuilder, Bollinger, Mississippi, we just received approval for them to begin full production on Polar Security Cutter number 1 on the 30th of April, just a few weeks ago. They've got over 95% 2D and functional design maturity that enables them to move forward with confidence. And they've already are constructing 10 of the prefabrication assembly units, which are the bottom center sections of that new icebreaker. These are complex vessels. They will provide the U.S. with the capability we need to assure and protect U.S. sovereignty in the polar regions.
And then want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the interdiction mission of the Coast Guard, particularly as it relates to the mission in the Gulf and the Pacific. As you referenced in your testimony, the President, when he was sworn in, immediately declared a state of emergency along the southwest border. He surged resources. We have seen the number of immigrants encountered drop dramatically along the southwest border, and we are seeing more and more individuals being pushed out from the land routes into sea routes, and we're also seeing more and more narcotics which are no longer being able to be brought into the country across what was an unsecured border. We're seeing more and more maritime operations. You mentioned your testimony in the first 4 months of FY25. We've seized more cocaine than we did in all of FY24. You talk about the 860 illegal aliens that have been interdicted trying to enter the country along our sea route. So talk a little bit about the importance of that mission as I believe we're going to see particularly drug cartels become more and more desperate to get their product into the United States. They're going to see more and more individuals that they're going to try to use the sea routes as a way to bring those narcotics in. And so talk a little bit about the importance of that mission, and then also if you have the resources that you need to maintain this heightened operational tempo that we've seen over the last 3 to 4 months.
Congressman, the operations we're doing across the southern border, we view the southern border along with the rest of DHS as a system. And so much like when you squeeze or tighten down on one part, the land border, for example, and the Coast Guard is operating on the Rio Grande River as part of that effort, we see elements of that flow or that vector try to make their way across other areas of the border. And so we're seeing an increase in activity off Southern California as we see increased smuggling attempts, moving illegal migration, and also drugs, trying to get those into not only San Diego, but further up the coast, up toward Los Angeles as well. And so the Coast Guard has increased our presence and operations, and along with the Customs and Border Protection, to make sure we can interdict and then deter those attempts. And so that requires not only an increased presence, but sustaining that presence over time and improving our capabilities, increased surveillance and sensors so that we can cue our forces to be able to better interdict those smuggling attempts. You know, these attempts are dangerous, and we had one of these smuggling vessels flip over in the surf off of San Diego last week that resulted in the deaths of 3 people, including a minor. And so these efforts are critical to stop, not only protect our border, but save lives as well. And so we do need increased and sustained top-line funding to be able to generate and sustain the assets, ships, cutters, boats, and aircraft and sensors necessary to enable us to protect that maritime approach to the U.S. border off of California, off of Texas and the Gulf of America, and then off of Florida and the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico.
Admiral, thank you for being here today, and thank you for your service. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Siscomani, you're recognized for 5 minutes for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Admiral, for being here. Thank you for answering our questions and helping shine a light on all the good work that men and women in the Coast Guard do, and thank you for your service. I represent a district in Arizona, 6th Congressional District. It's a border district. It includes portions of the southwest border. So while Coast Guard it doesn't come up every day in my desert district. It is something that I know that it's very linked to the issues that we deal with. And I'll just piggyback off what Congressman Guest was talking about regarding the border. So if you can build a little more on the both on the migrant apprehension side, and we know that the numbers have dipped at the land areas of the border. But if you can speak a little bit of the challenges that we're facing with migrants and how your mission set is increasing, and how will your budget requests help with these efforts, especially since I understand that the Coast Guard has continued to indirect a relatively large numbers of migrants in the Florida Straits and off the San Diego as well. So can you speak a little bit on that?
Thank you, Congressman, because we're not doing this mission alone, and I want to make sure I recognize, and we're getting great support from the Department of Defense. 2 Navy destroyers have been assigned to this mission, including off of California, and they're providing critical capability to support our needs in areas where we have gaps. But the challenges we're getting after with the smuggling attempts, we're seeing a range of conveyances, whether it's personal watercraft that move quickly under cover of darkness, these high-speed outboard engine-equipped, what we call pangas, fast boats, that move drugs or people quickly in attempts to cross the border. And so working together with the Navy, with the other members of DHS is critically important. But we're continually hampered by pressure for sustaining and operating our assets. Our boats and our ships we're not able to maintain them at the rate we need to. And so they're not always as available as we need them to be when a mission demand occurs or an operational case is detected. And so to be successful, persistent and harden our operational posture over the long term on the southern border, we need increased investment and sustainment for more modern assets that we're able to repair and keep operating with a greater availability.
You know, you mentioned something on the partnerships and the work, the collaboration you're having with DOD and other departments. When it comes down to the technology, I guess, and with CBP, how are you able to communicate and the intelligence maybe that is shared, or how do you coordinate specifically with CBP or Border Patrol?
Congressman, we're building on a very strong relationship with our brothers and sisters in Customs and Border Patrol already. We operate, particularly San Diego is just one example, under what we call a regional coordinating mechanism, or RECOM. That's a very strong team that works seamlessly together because it doesn't matter between us and CBP and other team members who gets the credit. It's all about the outcome and working together to achieve that. And so we start with those key ingredients. And then as we've seen the increased participation by the Department of Defense under U.S. Northern Command, including the naval elements that I mentioned before, they've seamlessly integrated into that operation as well. And so we're seeing their advanced sensor capability, and then the work of the intelligence community provide additional insights and awareness for us so that we can be better postured and then conduct those interdictions and control, secure, and defend the border and the maritime approaches.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks for what you do. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Admiral, I've got a couple areas I want to cover generally before we wrap up. And these are ones that can be, I'd like you to kind of respond to us later, not at the hearing. I don't know what the mix should be for your mission in terms of manned versus unmanned aircraft. I think one of your biggest selling points is your personnel, folks sitting behind you and you sitting there in front. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But as we talk about making less do more, and I'm not suggesting what the answer is, but I think it's appropriate for us to have an idea of here's how that's being incorporated as we go forward, especially in this new time when we talk about reconciliation, fiscal year 26, that sort of stuff. So that it's one of those things that we've checked on. So I'm happy to talk with your folks offline about that. Not that it'll be a secret, but we want to know that everybody else is talking about the wonders of this and that in terms of as a force multiplier and those sorts of things. So that's one of the boxes I think we need to check. Shoreside infrastructure is always one of those things that's not sex and violence, but nonetheless, when we talk about doing the right thing in terms of cutters, in terms of regions, in terms of air operations and all that other sort of stuff, and it's not a blame thing, it's just a reality that shoreside infrastructure has not been the tip of the spear, if you will, for a long time. And that's, like I said, you've got your mission to do, you got to take care of your people, you got to take care of your equipment, you got all that stuff, but nonetheless, it probably is an appropriate time to go, okay, as we sit here to jump off in terms of potentially some historic funding in terms of reconciliation as well as going forward into the next fiscal year, that's one of the areas I think we need to be able to say in our work product when somebody goes, it's like, well, we've talked about that and here's what our understanding is. And so that there's at least been a discussion and a consideration when the inevitable discussion comes on the floor for the Homeland Bill, that we can say with some factual basis, I know that's kind of novel these days in some quarters, but some factual basis, well, we've talked about that and here's where we're at. The Indo-Pacific is, God bless you. And by the way, shout out to your folks in District 11, who basically had the unenviable task of picking me up in Minden, Nevada in a C-27 out of the Sacramento base and getting me down to San Diego to look at everything you're doing as well as some of the other folks down there. Absolutely impressive organization of time and whatever. So if anybody wants to go to San Diego for a break, don't have these guys do it for you because we hit the ground running. There were demonstrations in terms of Customs Border Patrol stuff on the aircraft on the way down, right off onto the boats. And listen, for a guy from a state without a coastline, that's it's a little scary, you know, when you're, but I was in good hands and hats off to that command structure and those folks all the way through the organization. But as we look at that Indo-Pacific region, and you're talking about people swimming around the fence, boats turning over in surf, people, you know, rolling them up on the beach and running, and even some folks running through the yard of your commander down there. It's not a last post for retirement. I understand that. But as we talk about things a little farther offshore, obviously everybody focuses on the Customs Border Patrol mission, but we want to make sure that we've spent some time on. So what's going on the mundane stuff like fishing, stuff like that, which is also part of the mission. Lucky you folks. So we need to make sure that we've kind of hit that. And then I think the questions regarding regarding migrant interdiction have been pretty good. The one thing I want to put on your folks' radar screen, though, is one of our sayings here is we won't surprise you, and we don't want you to surprise us. So if you have an idea right now, I'd appreciate it. And maybe I shouldn't be nervous about it, but I'm nervous about, that's great that all these assets are integrated with DOD and all these other agencies and blah, blah, blah. And when you talk about naval vessels, you know, in the Gulf or off the coast of San Diego, and I'm sure there's drone technology being whatever and all that, do you expect to get billed by DOD or the individual services, Navy, Marines, you know, when you see vehicles running around, air assets, rotary wing, drone, whatever it is, do you expect to have any bills back to you from the Navy or whatever saying, hey, love supporting you, here's the bill?
Thank you, Chairman. With the respect to the 2 Navy ships that have been supporting us, we do not expect any request for reimbursement for the Navy for those operations. That's never been part of our discussion specific to those assets that are supporting us.
So my ongoing request of you during this hearing is as soon as the canary starts to cough in that mine and somebody goes, hey, by the way, I hope you folks are saving up because we're getting ready to send you a bill, we need to know about it soonest. Because based on the information we've got so far, we're not planning for any of that. And so, you know the old saying, it works in your mission as well as anybody's, forewarned is forearmed. So we're thinking there's no warning due at the moment. So if any of that starts to change, comms needs to kick into active gear.
I understand, Mr. Chairman. I'll work with the Department of Homeland Security and Department of Defense to make sure we tell you if that's changed.
Okay. Last thing is, and every federal organization that I'm aware of struggles with this, and I like what I've heard so far, but obviously you've got the right concern regarding, hey, we got to take care of our folks with all this stuff. So the challenge will be, and as the ranking member of the full committee indicated and the ranking member of this committee indicated, it's like we got to keep that balance in terms of how we taking care of our peeps with obviously with equipment and facilities, but also with what's going on with recruiting, which I understand has ticked up a lot, and that's good. But obviously, along with all the other multitasking, I'm glad to hear that that's part of the deal where we're trying to keep an eye on that, and we'll continue to. With that, I think I have missed Mr. Gonzalez. The floor is yours for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Chairman, for holding this hearing, and thank you, Admiral, for being here. I mean, just to piggyback off the Chairman, this is the committee that wants to make sure you have all the tools to be successful. My team knows that, you know, they put the binder together, and oftentimes I don't even use any of the notes, right? I create my own questions. Not today, right? Today, for all the staffers out there, I'm gonna read word for word what I've been given. And the reason being is I just got back from a trip from Japan where I met with the Prime Minister, and he brought up Alaska, which I thought was interesting. So my question to you, Admiral, is this. As we work to ensure Coast Guard is on track to meet the President's objectives to expand our fleet and strengthen our maritime presence, we have a need to make sure that we have the infrastructure necessary to meet these goals, especially as we work to enhance our presence in the Arctic. It is my understanding that plans to develop United States' first deep water Arctic port in Nome, Alaska was further delayed last year due to the Army Corps' cancellation of solicitation due to cost overruns. In my view, it is critical that we stay diligent in ensuring we move to build the infrastructure we need to be able to dock our military assets and catch up with the increasing presence of Russia and Chinese in Arctic waters. Admiral, can you speak to how the Coast Guard would utilize a fully developed deep water port in Alaska for operations in the Arctic?
Congressman, we are the principal surface operational fleet for the United States in the Arctic region, and we're permanently based in Alaska. As to a permanent deep water port in Nome or on the north coast, we've been looking at that issue and working with the Corps of Engineers. I want to make sure I get you the most coordinated answer back along with the Corps of Engineers, including that latest information, which I did not have. So I'd like to follow up with a briefing or with that for the record, sir.
Okay, that'd be great. And here's a little softer of a question. Can you further expand on the strategic importance of having the Arctic port in Alaska as it relates to the Arctic security?
Well, sir, Alaska is what makes us an Arctic nation, and so our Coast Guard's strong presence, permanent presence that's based out of there, is very important for our operations there, and ensuring the control, secure, and defense of our border in and around Alaska as well. We're going to be adding a permanent new asset up there in the coming years. In fact, this is the new commercially available icebreaker, what will be the Storis. It will sail on the 1st of June through the canal and up into the Gulf of Alaska above the Arctic Circle. Well, it will do operations. It will eventually be home ported in Juneau, which will be part of its permanent home port once that's complete. And so we're continuing to increase our footprint there. That's one of many assets that as we do modernization, will be moving up to be permanently assigned in Alaska.
Thank you for that. You know, we often talk about these in broad strokes, but, you know, this is the Appropriations Committee. This is where we want to know the details, where we want to know what specific needs that you may have as you work with the DHS Secretary and the administration to work on that. My final question is this. Does the Coast Guard anticipating needing access to additional deep water ports in the Arctic as it increases operations in the region?
Congressman, I don't have any specific needs identified at this point, but I'll take your question back and we'll give you a more complete answer, because that's an important answer as we look at our future force structure and force posture in Alaska as part of the Arctic.
Well, thank you for your testimony today, and once again, I look forward to working together, as certainly our committee looks forward to working with you as well. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Admiral, it's our job as members of the committee to make sure the department is appropriately spending money Congress provides, as well as to ensure the department has the resources it needs to execute its missions on an annual basis. In my view, the Coast Guard has chronically under-asked for resources. That's not an ignoble thing, but has chronically under-asked for resources. I need you to tell me what you need. Additionally, the Coast Guard strategy should be based on how the services would optimally act, not what it could do in a resource-constrained world. Now, I know that's easy to say, and there's a few moving parts in that, but it's on the record of me saying that to you folks, so those folks who may be watching farther up the chain can hear the same thing that you heard. There may be some additional questions members provide in writing, and we ask you to respond to those in a timely manner. I'd like to thank you for being here today. Budget constraints have made the service risk adverse when it comes to adopting new technologies. Often, an upfront investment can save an agency in the long term. For example, unmanned aircraft can be a cost-effective tool for the Coast Guard. I expect you will be a good partner in the upcoming fiscal year 2026 appropriations process, and I ask for your commitment to keep open lines of communication between this committee and the Coast Guard. That includes getting us your responses to questions in a timely fashion. For the get-back questions that members of the committee have had today, we ask that you respond within 15 days. If there are other ones in writing, then we'd like a 30-day time frame. Now, that is not in a vacuum where it's like, oh, you guys don't have anything to do but answer these questions. But just so you understand what everybody's tempo looks like these days, I expect to be in full committee markup the second week in June. That's nothing that anybody can put out over the whatever, but that's just my speculation. And I also expect to be on the floor with the Homeland bill in the second week in June. So it's not like, hey, I know you guys don't, it's like you got plenty to do, but so do we. And if we're going to be well-informed, then those questions that have been put out, we need those responses to it. And if that slips a little bit, I'm a bad predictor, and I'll take that responsibility. But that's kind of what's driving our request for response in those ways. And that doesn't mean necessarily that it needs to be, hey, somebody needs to write a term paper or whatever. If it can be handled with a phone call to the ranking member or to the ranking member of the committee or to one of us or to the committee staff, that's fine. If it turns out we need something more, then we'll get back to you. But nobody's going to criticize you for trying to be efficient with your use of time and your resources. And so, with that, I'd like to thank again the witness for being here today. I apologize for being here a little bit late. I hope I've made that up. And with that, the subcommittee stands adjourned.